It was 2:47 in the morning when my phone shattered the silence. I answered before the second ring. There was no greeting, only my father's voice, ragged and barely above a whisper. "Claire?" A long pause. His breathing sounded strained, as though every word scraped against broken ribs. "Don't let them sign anything." Metal crashed somewhere in the background. A woman shouted. Someone cursed. Then the line went dead. I stared at the dark screen for exactly 1 second. My father had never been a dramatic man. Walter Bennett had spent 42 years building ships along Charleston's waterfront. He had survived hurricanes, bankruptcy, and losing half a finger to a steel press without ever asking anyone to rescue him. If he called me at nearly 3 in the morning, something unimaginable had happened. I grabbed my keys and was halfway out the door before the phone rang again. This time it wasn't my father, it was Charleston Police Dispatch. "Ms. Bennett?" "Yes." "This is regarding Walter Bennett." My heart stopped. "He has been detained following an assault." I closed my eyes. "What hospital?" There was a brief silence. "No hospital, ma'am. He has been taken into custody." Every muscle in my body locked. "What do you mean taken into custody?" "The responding officers determined your father became violent during a domestic dispute. One female victim sustained injuries. Your brother is currently cooperating with investigators." "My brother, Ethan." I didn't answer. The dispatcher continued reading from whatever report had already been written. "According to witnesses, your father displayed signs of severe confusion and aggressive behavior consistent with advanced cognitive decline." No. That sentence was too clean, too rehearsed, too prepared. 3 hours earlier, my father had been texting me photographs of an old brass ship compass he was polishing for our family's annual Heritage Day. He had joked that I still couldn't read a nautical heading without GPS. A man discussing maritime history over text messages at 11 o'clock didn't suddenly become violently delusional before 3. Someone had written this story before the police even arrived. I hung up. As I drove through the sleeping streets of Charleston, rain hammered against my windshield so hard the city blurred into streaks of gold and gray. Every red light felt like an insult. Every passing second gave whoever was behind this more time. More time to destroy evidence. More time to move paperwork. More time to convince everyone that an old man had simply lost his mind. But my father hadn't said, "They're hurting me." He hadn't said, "I need help." He'd only said one thing. "Don't let them sign anything. Not save me. Not believe me. Stop the signatures." That wasn't the language of a frightened victim. That was the language of a man watching someone steal his life's work. 21 minutes later, I pulled into the police complex. The building glowed under harsh fluorescent lights that made everything look colder than it really was. Inside, officers moved with the casual rhythm of people finishing paperwork before sunrise. Coffee cups, computer screens, quiet conversations. No urgency, no concern. Certainly none for the 68-year-old veteran they claimed had attacked someone. I spotted him immediately. He sat alone on a steel bench. His white dress shirt was soaked with blood across one shoulder. One sleeve had been ripped nearly to the elbow. A dried stream of blood disappeared beneath the collar where someone had wrapped a strip of gauze with almost no care at all. His hands were cuffed. His head hung low. No doctor, no medic, no treatment. Across the room sat a completely different scene. Victoria Hawthorne, my sister-in-law, wrapped in a blanket, holding bottled water, 2 officers speaking gently to her, one detective kneeling beside her as if comforting a traumatized child. Beside her stood Ethan, perfect suit, perfect hair, perfect posture, not a wrinkle, not a drop of blood. He wasn't comforting our father. He wasn't asking whether the old man who taught him everything was alive. He was protecting his wife. Something inside me became perfectly still. Real danger doesn't make me angry. It makes me quiet. I walked toward my father. Ethan intercepted me before I reached him. "Claire?" His voice carried the same practiced confidence he'd developed after marrying into Charleston's oldest money. "Don't make this worse." I looked at him. Then at the blood drying on our father's shirt. Then back at him. "Worse? Victoria's traumatized." I almost laughed. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. "What did they sign?" For the first time since I arrived, his face changed. Not guilt, not sadness, fear, just for a fraction of a second. Enough. I knew then this night had never been about an argument inside our father's home. It had always been about paperwork, and somewhere, before I had even arrived, someone believed those papers were already legally binding. They were wrong. The Bennett shipyard sat on Charleston's eastern waterfront, long before luxury yachts and rooftop restaurants became fashionable. People driving past the weathered brick buildings usually saw nothing more than rusted cranes, faded warehouses, and old dry docks waiting to disappear beneath another expensive redevelopment project. They had no idea those docks had once built patrol boats for the Navy during the final years of World War II. My grandfather started the company with 12 welders and a single floating platform. My father spent the next 4 decades keeping it alive when every developer in South Carolina wanted the waterfront for themselves. He turned down offers that would have made most people unimaginably wealthy. Whenever I asked him why, he always gave the same answer. If a family sells its history just because someone offers enough money, then it never really owned that history in the first place. At 16, I thought he was stubborn. At 34, after spending a decade prosecuting financial crimes across the country, I finally understood. People rarely steal land. They steal identity. The land is simply the receipt. That was why the old brass ship compass always remained locked inside my father's office. It wasn't valuable because of the metal. It was valuable because my grandfather carried it during every voyage before returning home to build the shipyard. Whenever a difficult decision had to be made, my father would quietly place the compass on his desk before saying a single word. He claimed it reminded him to choose direction before profit. Most people smiled politely when they heard that story. Developers laughed. Investors rolled their eyes. My brother hated it. Ethan believed symbols belonged in museums. Money belonged in bank accounts. We hadn't always been different. Growing up, we chased crabs beneath the same docks, skipped stones across the harbor, and argued over who would someday run the family business. Then life split us in opposite directions. I studied law because I wanted to understand how powerful people manipulated systems. Ethan studied finance because he wanted to become one of those powerful people. Neither choice was wrong, until ambition became addiction. The first time I met Victoria Hawthorne, she arrived wearing designer sunglasses that cost more than most families spent on groceries in a month. She smiled perfectly, spoke perfectly, listened perfectly. She could make complete strangers feel like lifelong friends within 5 minutes. It was an extraordinary talent. Later, I realized it was also her profession. Victoria wasn't simply good with people. She built public images for corporations facing scandals. She knew exactly which emotions people believed, and exactly how to manufacture them. Our mother adored her immediately. Margaret Bennett spent most of her life believing success meant finally being invited into rooms where wealthy families whispered behind crystal glasses. Victoria opened those doors. Suddenly, my mother was attending charity galas, yacht fundraisers, historical preservation dinners, and private country club events she had only admired from magazine photographs. She changed slowly, almost invisibly. She stopped talking about family dinners. She started talking about appearances. She stopped asking whether people were honest. She asked whether they were influential. She stopped saying, "Do what's right." She began saying, "Don't embarrass the family." My father noticed. He never argued. He simply spent more time at the shipyard. Sometimes I'd find him sitting alone inside the old drafting room after sunset, polishing the brass compass while the harbor lights reflected across the windows. Everything changes, he once told me. The question isn't whether people change. It's whether they remember who they were before they changed. At the time, I assumed he was talking about the city. Charleston had transformed dramatically over 20 years. Historic neighborhoods disappeared beneath luxury condominiums. Working families moved farther inland. Old businesses vanished one after another. Only later did I realize he had been talking about his own family, about Ethan, about Mom, perhaps even about himself. 3 months before the night of the attack, Ethan arrived unexpectedly carrying architectural renderings rolled beneath one arm. He spread them across the conference table inside the shipyard office. Luxury marina, boutique hotel, private residences, high-end retail, every sketch was breathtaking. Every drawing erased another piece of our family's history. You have to stop thinking like a shipbuilder, Ethan insisted. This property is worth hundreds of millions if it's developed correctly. Dad studied the drawings quietly, then he rolled every blueprint back together. No. That single word lasted less than a second. Its consequences would last forever. Ethan smiled as though the conversation wasn't over. It doesn't really belong to just you anymore. My father looked up slowly. What does that mean? For a brief moment, the confidence disappeared from Ethan's face. Then Victoria stepped between them, wearing the same pleasant smile she always wore whenever conversations became uncomfortable. We're only trying to protect your legacy. My father looked from Ethan to Victoria, then to the brass compass resting on his desk. He placed one weathered hand across it. My legacy doesn't need protection. It needs people who won't sell it. No one raised their voice. No one slammed a door. The meeting ended politely, but as I watched Ethan and Victoria walk toward the parking lot together, something felt profoundly wrong. Not because they were disappointed, because they weren't surprised. They had expected him to refuse, almost as though his answer had never really mattered. Standing inside the police station now, watching dried blood stain my father's shirt, that memory returned with terrifying clarity. The argument inside his house hadn't started tonight. It had started months ago. Tonight was simply the moment someone decided persuasion was no longer enough. And if my instincts were right, the people responsible had been planning this far longer than anyone realized. The detective assigned to my father's case finally looked up from his paperwork when I stopped beside the holding bench. Family members need to remain behind the line. I need to speak with my father. He'll have an opportunity after processing. The word landed like sandpaper. A man bleeding through his shirt wasn't receiving medical treatment. He was being processed. I glanced at my father. His breathing was controlled, but not because he wasn't in pain. Walter Bennett had spent a lifetime teaching himself never to show weakness to people looking for leverage. Even now, sitting in handcuffs, he kept his shoulders square. When he finally lifted his head and saw me, relief crossed his face for only a heartbeat. Then it disappeared. "Claire? I'm here." His voice remained steady despite the dried blood along his temple. "Did anyone sign?" "No." A tiny nod. Almost invisible, but I saw it. Whatever mattered most to him still hadn't happened. That bought us time. The detective stepped between us. "Sir, don't discuss the investigation." I turned toward him. "What investigation?" "The assault that occurred at Mr. Bennett's residence. I'd like to see the warrant." "There isn't one." "The arrest affidavit?" "It's being finalized." "The medical report documenting my father's alleged psychological episode?" His jaw tightened. "We have witness statements." "From whom?" He hesitated, then answered. "Your brother. And Mrs. Ethan Bennett." "And anyone else?" Silence. No neighbors, no independent witness, no responding paramedic, no emergency physician. Just the son who benefited. And the daughter-in-law who claimed to be the victim. That wasn't evidence. That was choreography. Before I could ask another question, Victoria rose from her chair. The blanket slid effortlessly from her shoulders. She walked toward us slowly, one hand resting lightly against Ethan's arm. To anyone watching, she looked exhausted, fragile, heartbroken. Only someone paying close attention would notice what I noticed. Her mascara hadn't run, not even slightly. Her blouse was immaculate. Her manicure was flawless. Even the tiny diamond bracelet on her wrist sat perfectly centered. People who survive violent attacks don't usually look professionally photographed. She stopped several feet away. "Claire?" Her voice trembled just enough. "I know this is hard." I looked at the faint scratch on the back of her hand, then at the blood covering my father's sleeve. One injury required a designer bandage. The other required 12 stitches. Yet somehow everyone had already decided who the victim was. "I never wanted this." She lowered her eyes. "He frightened me." My father let out the smallest sigh, not because he was defeated, because he finally understood there was no point explaining the truth to people who had already invested in a lie. Ethan stepped forward. "She's been through enough." I ignored him. Instead, I looked directly at Victoria. "What were you trying to sign?" Her expression froze, only for a fraction of a second. But it was there. a microscopic delay before the performance resumed. I don't know what you're talking about. You do? No. Ethan? He folded his arms. This isn't about paperwork. It absolutely is. The detective finally lost patience. Ms. Bennett, if you continue interfering, I'm asking questions. You are obstructing an active investigation. No, I replied calmly. I'm identifying motive. The room became noticeably quieter. Several officers had begun listening. Nobody likes hearing a story that suddenly makes more sense than the official version. I reached into my handbag and removed a slim leather business credential. Not dramatically, not as a threat, simply placing it on the detective's desk. He glanced down, read the first line, then the second. His posture changed immediately. Former federal prosecutor, Financial Crimes Division. Certified specialist in trust litigation and elder financial exploitation. He looked back at me, very differently this time. You prosecuted elder fraud cases? For 11 years, the detective swallowed. I continued before anyone else could speak. In those 11 years, I never once saw a family falsely claim dementia without money being involved. I looked directly at Ethan, so let me stop pretending. How much is the property worth? Nobody answered. 20 million, silence. 30? Victoria's breathing became slightly shallower. Interesting, I wasn't even close to the real number yet. I stepped closer. What exactly was sitting on the dining room table tonight? Nothing, no answer. So I changed the question. What document did my father refuse to sign? Ethan finally spoke. It doesn't matter anymore. There it was. Not. There weren't any documents. Not. You're imagining things. Instead. It doesn't matter anymore. Past tense, meaning the paperwork already existed. Meaning whatever they wanted had progressed beyond simple discussion. I leaned toward him. It matters very much. His eyes met mine. For the first time that night, I saw genuine fear. Not fear of prison. Not fear of being exposed. Fear that I might discover something before sunrise. Behind me, I heard metal scrape softly. My father shifted on the bench. His cuffed hands moved just enough for something to slide from beneath his torn sleeve. A tiny folded piece of waterproof drafting paper, no larger than a receipt. No one else noticed. I bent as though adjusting my shoe. My fingers closed around it. Then I slipped it into my pocket without breaking eye contact with Ethan. He hadn't seen it. Victoria hadn't seen it. But my father had just managed to pass me something while sitting handcuffed in a police station. And judging by the urgency in his eyes, whatever was written on that small piece of paper was far more dangerous than anything anyone had said aloud that night. The folded paper remained in my coat pocket all the way to Charleston General Hospital. I didn't open it in the patrol car. I didn't read it while following the ambulance. And I certainly wasn't about to unfold it inside a hallway crowded with police officers. People make careless mistakes when adrenaline convinces them every second matters. My father had taught me something different. If the truth survived 50 years, it can survive another 5 minutes. The emergency department erupted into controlled chaos the moment the ambulance backed into the trauma bay. Doctors surrounded my father before the wheels of the stretcher stopped moving. Blood pressure, neurological assessment, CT scan, possible rib fractures, deep scalp laceration. No one mentioned dementia. No physician observed confusion. No nurse documented memory loss. Every medical professional who actually examined him reached the same conclusion within minutes. He had suffered blunt force trauma, nothing more. While the trauma team worked, I stepped into a quiet consultation room and finally unfolded the paper. At first glance, it looked insignificant. Just a torn strip from an old blueprint. Across the center, written in my father's unmistakable handwriting, were only 6 words. Safe Deposit Box 214, Harbor National. Below that, one final sentence. Don't trust the family attorney. I read it twice, then a third time. The words settled over me like ice water. Our family attorney, Richard Sloan, had represented the Bennetts for nearly 25 years. He handled estate planning, property transactions, corporate filings, trust amendments. If my father no longer trusted him, this conspiracy had reached much farther than I imagined. A soft knock interrupted us. It wasn't a police officer, it was Dr. Emily Carter, the attending trauma surgeon. I finished reviewing your father's scans. How bad? 12 stitches, 3 fractured ribs, a severe concussion. She hesitated. But doctors never pause before good news. But what? He keeps asking me the same question. What question? Has anyone touched my office? Not. Where am I? Not. What happened? Not. Who attacked me? His greatest concern wasn't his injuries. It was whatever remained inside that office. I thanked the doctor and walked upstairs to the secure recovery unit. Dad looked exhausted. The color hadn't returned to his face yet, but his eyes were perfectly clear. You found it, I nodded. Safe deposit box 214. A faint smile crossed his lips. Good. What is it? Insurance? Against what? He looked toward the closed hospital door before answering. Against greed. I pulled a chair beside his bed. Dad, I need the truth. The whole truth. He closed his eyes for several seconds. When he opened them again, they belonged to a man who had already accepted there was no going back. 3 years ago, I realized Ethan wasn't just borrowing against his development company, he was borrowing against promises. What does that mean? He promised investors projects he couldn't deliver. He promised banks revenue that didn't exist. He promised the Hawthorne family waterfront access he didn't own. Every sentence felt heavier than the last. I refused to sell, so they found another way. The dementia? He nodded. They started asking questions about my memory almost a year ago. Did you forget your medication? Do you remember what day it is? Should someone start helping with the finances? I thought they were concerned. They were documenting. A chill traveled slowly down my spine. Not documenting illness, creating history, every casual conversation, every harmless question, every family dinner, could later become evidence. He forgot appointments. He repeated stories. He seemed confused. Tiny observations, collected over months, enough to convince strangers, especially strangers already looking for reasons to believe them. They were building a file, Dad nodded, piece by piece, long before tonight. I sat back silently. Professional fraud rarely begins with forged signatures. It begins by manufacturing credibility. When the final lie arrives, everyone has already been conditioned to accept it. Dad, when did you stop trusting Richard Sloan? His expression hardened immediately. The day he asked me to update the trust. What trust? Our heritage trust. I frowned. What heritage trust? For several seconds he simply watched me. Then he smiled sadly. I never told you. The room became very quiet. 20 years ago, after your mother nearly lost everything investing with one of her cousins, I transferred the shipyard into an irrevocable heritage trust. I stared at him. You what? No one can force its sale. No creditor can seize it. No marriage can divide it. No court can easily dismantle it. I felt my pulse quicken. If that's true, then Ethan couldn't legally transfer the property. He couldn't. Unless... My father finished the sentence for me. Unless someone convinced the world I was no longer legally competent. Everything snapped into place. The fake dementia, the psychiatric paperwork, the assault, the police report, the urgency, the signatures. None of it had ever been about simply stealing land. They needed something much larger. They needed to destroy the only person standing between them, and a trust designed specifically to stop people exactly like them. A soft knock interrupted us. Hospital security stepped inside. Ms. Bennett, there's someone downstairs insisting on seeing you. Who? The guard hesitated. He says he's your family's attorney. Richard Sloan. My father closed his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Don't let him know that we already remember everything. I stood slowly. For the first time since receiving that phone call at 2:47 a.m., I no longer felt like I was reacting to a crime. I was walking into the middle of a carefully engineered operation, and if Richard Sloan had arrived at the hospital before sunrise, it wasn't because he was worried about his client. It was because someone desperately needed one final signature before the truth reached daylight. Richard Sloan entered the consultation room carrying nothing but a slim leather briefcase and 40 years of carefully polished confidence. At 63, he looked exactly the way successful attorneys are expected to look. Tailored navy suit, silver hair, measured smile, the kind of man juries instinctively trusted before he ever spoke. Claire, he extended his hand. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. I looked at it, then back at him. I doubt that. His smile faltered for less than a second before returning. I've known your family for most of your life. I know. I helped draft your parents' wills. I know. I've protected the Bennett estate for decades. Have you? The room fell silent. Richard slowly lowered his hand. I understand emotions are running high. I'm not emotional. I've just come from speaking with Ethan. That doesn't surprise me. He believes this entire situation has become unnecessarily adversarial. I almost smiled. Adversarial. Such an elegant word for attempted theft. Richard opened his briefcase and removed a neatly organized folder. There are a few administrative matters that should be addressed, while Walter remains hospitalized. He slid the folder across the table. I'd appreciate your help facilitating them. I didn't touch it. What kind of administrative matters? Temporary financial continuity. What does that mean? So bills continue being paid. So payroll remains uninterrupted. So business operations aren't affected. Every answer sounded perfectly reasonable. Until you understood trust litigation. Because no competent estate attorney would ever request signatures before the attending neurologist completed a capacity evaluation. Richard knew that. I knew he knew. Yet here he was, trying anyway. You seem eager. I'm being responsible. No, I replied quietly. You're being urgent. His expression barely changed, but his fingers tightened around the edge of the folder. I think you're misunderstanding the situation. I don't think I am, he leaned back. Claire, your father has suffered a serious head injury. He has. There may be lasting cognitive consequences. There may. Preparing contingency documents is simply prudent. I nodded thoughtfully. Then let's wait until his physicians complete their evaluation. A pause. That may take days. So, important opportunities could be lost. There it is. Richard frowned. I'm sorry? Opportunities. Not health, not recovery, not family. Opportunities. Money had finally entered the conversation. He noticed my eyes lingering on the folder. Perhaps believing curiosity had replaced suspicion, he gently pushed it closer. I assure you, everything here is entirely standard. I finally picked it up. Not to sign, to read. The first few pages were harmless. Insurance authorizations, operational notices, routine banking language. Exactly what an experienced attorney would use to lower someone's guard. Then, page 17, I stopped. A single paragraph buried beneath 3 pages of technical legal language. Authority to negotiate transfer of maritime commercial assets. Interesting. Not maintain, not preserve. Transfer. Hidden in plain sight. Most people would never notice. Richard watched me carefully. You read quickly. I prosecute quickly. His eyes narrowed. I used to. He understood immediately. This wasn't a daughter reading family paperwork. This was a former federal prosecutor dissecting intent. I closed the folder. Did Ethan draft this? No. You did. My office prepared it. When? Yesterday afternoon. Yesterday. Hours before the alleged assault. Hours before my father supposedly became mentally unstable, meaning someone anticipated his incapacity before it existed. The timeline collapsed, completely. Richard realized it the exact same moment I did. Neither of us spoke. Instead, I reached into my handbag and quietly placed a digital voice recorder onto the table. Its red recording light blinked softly. I always record legal meetings involving vulnerable adults. His face lost color. Since when? Since I convicted an attorney who manipulated an elderly widow into signing away $18 million. The silence became suffocating. He slowly removed his glasses, polished them, buying himself time. Finally, he asked the question he had wanted to ask from the beginning. Has Walter said anything to you? I smiled. What makes you think he remembers enough to say anything? Richard studied me, searching, measuring, calculating. For nearly 20 seconds he said nothing, then he stood. I'll return after he's rested. I'm sure you will. He picked up his briefcase, left the folder behind, walked calmly toward the door. Just before leaving, he paused. Without turning around, he spoke quietly. You should be careful, Claire. Powerful people rarely lose gracefully. The door closed behind him. I waited another 10 seconds before opening the folder again. This time I examined every page under the reading lamp. Tiny initials appeared in the bottom corner of each document. R.S. Richard Sloan, except one page. Page 23, different initials, V.H. Victoria Hawthorne, not legal review, document preparation. Victoria hadn't simply witnessed the paperwork. She had helped create it. A public relations executive had no legitimate reason to draft trust transfer language. Unless she had been coordinating the operation long before lawyers became involved. My phone vibrated. A secure encrypted message from an investigator I had worked with years earlier. Only one sentence appeared on the screen. Harbor National confirms someone accessed safe deposit box 214 yesterday, but nothing was removed. I stared at the message. Yesterday. Someone had already found the box, or tried to, which meant they knew it existed, but they hadn't opened it. Because they couldn't. Whatever was inside that safe deposit box was important enough to search for before attacking my father. And whatever they failed to find was almost certainly the one thing capable of destroying every lie they had built. At exactly 8:12 the next morning, I walked into Harbor National Bank carrying nothing except my father's identification letter, my law license, and the brass key that had been taped beneath the bottom drawer of his office desk years ago. He had never told anyone about the key, not even me, until now. The bank manager was waiting. His expression suggested he hadn't slept much either. "Ms. Bennett, I'm Daniel Reeves. I understand your father authorized you years ago as secondary access. I wasn't aware until last night." He nodded. Neither was anyone else. That answer immediately caught my attention. Meaning? He hesitated before continuing. "Someone attempted to gain access yesterday afternoon." "I know. They presented a notarized power of attorney." I remained silent. "We declined." "Why?" "The signatures appeared authentic. The documents appeared valid. But the authorization file attached to box 214 required one additional condition." "What condition?" Daniel looked directly at me. "A handwritten verification phrase known only to your father." I blinked. "What phrase?" "I'm not permitted to disclose it. Unless the authorized holder already knows it." I smiled despite myself. That sounded exactly like Walter Bennett. He trusted paper, but he trusted memory even more. Daniel escorted me through 2 layers of reinforced security before stopping outside an old steel vault. Rows upon rows of safe deposit boxes stretched across the walls. Thousands of private lives, thousands of hidden truths. He unlocked the first mechanism. I unlocked the second. Box 214 slid forward with surprising weight. Inside sat only 3 items: a thick sealed envelope, a flash drive, the brass compass. For a long moment I simply stared. My father had hidden our family's most treasured possession inside a bank vault. Not to protect its financial value, to protect what it represented. Direction before profit. I opened the envelope first. Inside rested dozens of original documents: corporate records, trust amendments, property surveys, board minutes, everything perfectly organized. Then I reached the final section, a notarized affidavit dated almost 4 years earlier. Signed by my father, signed by 2 independent witnesses, and attached to it, a certified forensic accounting report. I began reading. Halfway through the first page, I stopped breathing. The report documented more than failed investments. It documented systematic embezzlement. Millions of dollars quietly siphoned from Ethan's development company into shell corporations controlled by offshore partnerships. One partnership led directly to the Hawthorne family investment office. Another, to Richard Sloan's private consulting firm. The attorney wasn't protecting the fraud. He had been paid to build it. I inserted the flash drive into the secure viewing terminal provided inside the vault room. Several folders appeared: security camera archive, voice memos, trust instructions, emergency release. I opened the first video. The timestamp read 8 months earlier. My father sat inside his office speaking directly into the camera. "If you're watching this, then someone finally tried." He looked older than I remembered. Not weaker, simply tired. "I've spent nearly a year pretending not to notice. I let them believe I was forgetting names. I repeated stories on purpose. I mispronounced dates. I wanted to know how far they were willing to go. He leaned forward. If greed only wants money, it eventually becomes impatient, and impatient people make mistakes. The second video showed something even more devastating. Hidden security footage from inside the dining room. Last night's confrontation. No missing audio, no edited angles, everything. Victoria placing documents on the table. Richard explaining where signatures belonged. Ethan insisting the trust could be modified just this once. My father refusing calmly, then standing, Victoria blocking the doorway. Ethan grabbing his father's wrist, Walter pulling away, a heavy crystal decanter falling from the cabinet. Not because my father attacked anyone, because Ethan shoved him backward. The bottle struck my father's shoulder. He collapsed against the dining table. Blood immediately covered his shirt. Victoria looked directly at the security camera mounted above the fireplace. Then, she unplugged it. Too late. The wireless backup had already transmitted everything to encrypted storage. I sat frozen. Not because the truth surprised me, because the betrayal was somehow even colder than I imagined. There had never been a fight. There had been an ambush. I copied every file, every document, every video, then quietly closed the vault. When I walked back into the lobby, Daniel Reeves was waiting with an uncomfortable expression. "There's one more thing." "What is it?" He handed me a visitor log. Yesterday's entry, 3 names, Richard Sloan, Victoria Hawthorne, Ethan Bennett. Each had arrived separately. Each requested access to Box 214. Each had been denied. Meaning this wasn't a desperate overnight decision after a family argument. It was a coordinated operation planned days in advance, maybe weeks. As I thanked Daniel and headed toward the parking garage, my phone exploded with notifications, news alerts, breaking headlines, social media. Every local station carried the exact same story. Prominent Charleston businessman allegedly attacks daughter-in-law during dementia episode. The narrative had already gone public. Photographs, anonymous police sources, statements from family representatives. Someone had activated the media before sunrise, which meant they intended to pressure prosecutors long before evidence could surface. I looked down at the flash drive in my hand, then at the television mounted above the bank lobby. They believed they controlled the story. They believed public opinion would bury the truth. What they didn't know was that my father had spent nearly a year quietly collecting every piece of evidence they would someday need to destroy themselves. He hadn't prepared for a trial. He had prepared for a reckoning. And tomorrow morning, the entire city was going to watch it happen live. By 9 o'clock the next morning, Courtroom 3 of the Charleston County Courthouse was overflowing. Reporters lined the back wall. Local business leaders filled every remaining seat. Television cameras waited outside the entrance. Everyone expected one story, an aging shipyard owner losing his mind. Instead, they witnessed the complete collapse of a carefully manufactured lie. The emergency hearing had been requested by Ethan's legal team before sunrise. Their objective was simple: declare Walter Bennett legally incapacitated, appoint a temporary conservator, transfer operational authority over the Heritage Trust, complete the process before anyone could challenge it. Richard Sloan stood confidently before the judge. He spoke first. He described my father as increasingly forgetful. He presented statements from Ethan, statements from Victoria, a psychiatrist's preliminary consultation request, selective medical records, a polished timeline. Months of carefully assembled observations. On paper, it looked convincing. Then the judge looked toward our table. "Ms. Bennett, you may respond." I stood. "No opening statement, Your Honor. I'd simply like to play Exhibit 1. The courtroom lights dimmed. The first video appeared. Not the confrontation, the planning meeting, 3 weeks earlier. Hidden security footage from the shipyard conference room. Richard Sloan, Victoria Hawthorne, Ethan Bennett. Alone. No one knew my father had installed cameras after noticing documents mysteriously moving around his office. Their conversation filled the silent courtroom. Richard's voice came first. "If the capacity evaluation goes through before year end, the trust can be challenged," Victoria replied calmly. "The public narrative has to come first." Ethan asked only one question. "How long before he realizes what we're doing?" Richard smiled. He won't. The video ended. Silence. Not ordinary silence. The kind that exists when hundreds of people realize they have just watched a crime unfold in real time. Richard stood abruptly. I object. That recording, the judge interrupted. Sit down. His voice had become noticeably colder. I continued. Exhibit 2. The dining room footage appeared. Every second, every angle, no edits. The courtroom watched Ethan shove his father backward, watched Victoria unplug the visible camera, watched Richard calmly collect unsigned paperwork before calling emergency services. No assault by Walter Bennett. No dementia episode. No violent confusion. Only calculated fraud. Several reporters left the room at a run. The headline had just changed. Richard attempted to speak again. He couldn't. The judge had already ordered the bailiff to confiscate every document submitted by his office. Then I introduced Exhibit 3, the forensic accounting report, bank transfers, offshore corporations, consulting payments, investment trails. Everything linked together with financial precision. Every dollar left fingerprints. Every fingerprint pointed to the same 3 people. Richard Sloan, Victoria Hawthorne, Ethan Bennett, the prosecutor assigned to observe the hearing, quietly stood. Your Honor, the state requests immediate criminal referral. The judge nodded without hesitation. So ordered. Everything happened quickly after that. Court deputies approached Richard first. He didn't resist. He simply removed his glasses and stared at the floor. Victoria remained perfectly composed until officers reached Ethan. He turned toward her instinctively. She stepped backward. One step, then another, without saying a word, without touching him, without looking him in the eyes. The partnership that had taken years to build dissolved in less than 5 seconds. Ethan understood immediately. She was saving herself, exactly as she always had. He laughed once, a quiet, exhausted laugh, then held out his wrists for the handcuffs. I expected satisfaction. Instead, I felt strangely empty, because justice never returns the years people lose while trusting the wrong person. It only prevents more years from being stolen. When the courtroom finally emptied, my father remained seated. He looked toward the brass compass resting on the evidence table. The judge noticed. After signing the final order restoring every legal right and dismissing the incapacity petition with prejudice, he walked down from the bench, carrying it. This belongs to your family. Dad accepted it with both hands. For several seconds, he simply traced the worn brass edges with his thumb. Then he handed it to me. I've carried it long enough. I looked at him. No. He smiled. You already understand what it means. I closed my fingers around the compass. For the first time in my life, it felt heavier than metal. Outside the courthouse, microphones surrounded us. Questions came from every direction. Mr. Bennett, do you forgive your son? What happens to the shipyard now? Will you sue everyone involved? Dad waited until the noise settled, then answered only once. My grandfather taught me that a compass doesn't punish a ship for drifting. It simply keeps pointing north. The rest is the captain's decision. He turned and walked away. No celebration, no dramatic speech, no victory pose. Just an old man returning to the waterfront he had protected his entire life. 6 months later, the Bennett shipyard reopened after extensive restoration. Not as a luxury marina, not as a private resort, but as a maritime apprenticeship foundation, teaching young craftsmen skills that were disappearing across America. The Heritage Trust expanded. Veterans trained there. High school students learned welding and marine engineering. Families visited the museum built inside the original drafting hall. The brass compass rested beneath protective glass near the entrance, not because it was expensive, because every visitor deserved to know why one ordinary object had survived generations of temptation. Richard Sloan surrendered his law license before sentencing. Victoria accepted a plea agreement and agreed to testify in multiple financial fraud investigations. Ethan received the longest sentence, not because he wanted wealth, because he tried to obtain it by erasing the very man who gave him everything. People often ask me whether exposing my own family was difficult. They're asking the wrong question. The difficult part wasn't telling the truth. The difficult part was accepting that silence would have made me an accomplice. Some inherit money, some inherit property. I inherited something far more valuable, a direction. And as long as I keep following it, no one will ever be able to steal what truly matters.